Chapter 1. Michael read over the books of his diner. It showed a healthy profit being made, but the reading was wearing on Michael. It was always the same, but it had to be done. Although he and his wife, Amy, co-owned the establishment, Michael rebuffed her attempts to do more of the paperwork. He felt that it was the man's place to be the breadwinner, and if they were going to be partners in a business, he would have to do most of the work. To Michael, doing most of the work was the only real source of his masculinity. It was the only thing in his life that made him feel like a man. He was a blonde, blue-eyed male. It would take days of not shaving for him to even have stubble on his face. He was of average height, but he was so thin that he appeared to be emaciated. His inability to put on weight often caused him embarrassment since his resulting physique was decidedly unmanly. His wife knew of his embarrassment. Amy would often call him waif-like when she wanted to verbally jab at him when she was upset with him. The term cut through Michael. It implied he was fragile and weak. Part of him did not want to be considered that, but another part of it craved it. Michael never told his wife that he did not want to be called waif-like. The part of him that sought to dress like a woman thought of it as a compliment, but his usually dominant male side often hid that. It did not hide it from Amy. She knew Michael too well. She knew that the power of the term she lobbed at him came from the gnawing, internal debate it caused in Michael. Michael was torn between his feeling of a need to project a masculine front and his intense desire to dress as a woman. He loved everything about women. He loved their shapes, their smell, their look, their shoes, clothes, and much more. He wanted to be one, but he knew it could never be. Amy was drawn to Michael by his lack of masculinity. They were equals when they met, and though he did most of the work at the diner, she ran the home. They both knew that Amy called the shots in their relationship and it worked for them. Michael found in Amy the strong-willed woman he desired. In Michael, Amy had found the man of her dreams, a man willing to do what it took to please her. They loved each other. Although she disliked it, Amy even tolerated Michael's occasional escapades in the home as a cross-dresser. He had a trunk full of clothes that he would wear infrequently. Michael kept his dressing to a few times a year because he knew that Amy did not like seeing him that way. She would refer to him as Miko when he was cross-dressed and never as Michael. Michael knew that she was trying to divorce the cross-dresser from her husband in her mind. He felt guilty cross-dressing around her, although Amy never wanted him to feel that way. It was largely that cross-dressing desire that drove Michael to spend tireless hours working on the tedious work at his business. It was how he was sure he could prove his worth as a man to himself and Amy. However, as Michael stared down at the sheets of paper in front of him, he could no longer concentrate on them. The numbers started to run together. Tears started to appear in his eyes for reasons he could not understand. He began to sob. As the overnight crew worked at his diner, Michael buried his head in his hands. The overnight shift manager at the diner overheard his uncontrollable sobs. Diane walked into the small office next to the kitchen and asked, "Michael, what's wrong?" Michael was unable to answer intelligibly. Diane rushed out of the office and called Amy at home immediately. Amy rushed down to the diner and ran into the office. She found her husband, red-eyed, staring vacantly at the sheets of paper in front of him. Amy pulled him off the chair and led him out of the office. They walked through the kitchen, where the kitchen staff gave him concerned looks as Amy led him towards the back door. He walked beside her, muttering financial terms in a loop. Diane went back to overseeing the workers at the restaurant and running the register as Amy helped lead him to her car. Michael kept muttering to himself different aspects of the business as Amy hastily drove them home. Amy helped him out of the car and into the home. She laid him down on the couch and went to make tea for the two of them. She brought him a cup as soon as possible and helped to sit him upright. Michael looked at her as he forced tears away from his eyes. Amy shook her head with a look of concern on her face as she looked at her disheveled husband. Michael wanted to hide in shame for what he had done. Business was good, but still it overwhelmed him. The stress, for him, just seemed to never end. You can't keep doing this to yourself, Amy said as she stroked his hand. I know, Michael said as he pulled his hand away and grabbed the cup of tea off the table. You need some time off. Don't worry. I can run it without you, Amy said while Michael took a sip. I know you can, but I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I wasn't working. A smile crossed Amy's face. Michael noticed it and inquired, What's so funny? Nothing, darling. I've just got an idea. What? I know what you can do with your time off. What do you mean? You can take care of the house. Oh, but I know we share the chores now. And believe me, I thank you for it. You do more than any husband I know, but I think this is something you need. How do you figure? Well, Michael, you always took to cleaning and cooking like, oh, how do I put this, a housewife. I guess that would be the closest word I could get to it. Michael, feeling his manhood impugned and excited, felt the need to try to defend his status in his wife's eyes, but Amy would have none of it. Before he could manage to speak, Amy continued, From your little cross-dresser games I indulge, I've come to realize that you're repressing a desire to live the role more full-time. Michael wanted to deny the truth of what she said, but he could not muster the will to lie to her. Amy read his silence as an admission and continued, So what I'm suggesting is that you spend your time here being the housewife for a week or so. Michael had cleaned the house dressed as a woman before. He had also occasionally slept in a nightie when he was in bed with her. Amy had tolerated it, but never encouraged it before. Michael feared that he was losing his masculinity in his wife's eyes. As that fear played out in his mind, he found the will to state, I can't do it. Yes, you can. No, I can't. I can't be the girl in. Well, I certainly won't be the man, Michael. I have no desire to be one. I'm not telling you that I want you to be a girl. I'm saying I think you have to be one, temporarily. I think you need a release. Well, maybe a vacation. No. I've been with you on vacations, Michael. You never relax. Your head is always in the business. You need to get away from yourself, and this may be the only way you can. I don't want to lose you, Michael finally blurted out. Amy smiled. She knew he was serious. That fear was the source of his denial of the truth. She felt the need to temper his fears. Michael, you don't have to worry about that. I can divorce you from the woman you're going to be. I do it all the time whenever Mika shows up to clean this house or share our bed. I know you have a male and female side to you. I love your male side. I do. I like your female side. I think it makes you a better man. If I had my choice, you'd always be the man I love, but right now that man needs to be a woman to keep himself together. No. I swear I don't. Please, Michael. I know what's in your heart. You long for it. You've wanted to spend some time as Mika, but you've kept it to a minimum for me. I thank you for that. I really do, but now I have to sacrifice for you. I don't want you to. Michael, I really think you're heading towards an early grave. You have to learn to channel away your stress. You always looked the least stressed when you were taking care of the home and cooking. It's the male part of you that's stressed. It's the girl part of you that relaxes. I would like that to change in the future, but now is not the time. Right now, you need to relax, and the only way you seem to know how is to be Mika. So, please be her. You can find another way later. Right now, you don't have the time. We'll get you right, and then you can find another way to get your mind off the business. Michael nodded in resignation. He wanted to spend time as Mika. He knew Amy was right, but he feared how she would react to having Michael gone for a week and replaced by his female alter ego. He wondered if she really could keep the two separate for any extended length of time. Still, at that desperate moment, Michael was ready to believe her. Amy took Michael's hand and led him to their bed. Little did Michael know, But Amy did not plan on sharing it with him again for at least a week. Chapter 2. The next morning, Michael was awakened by his wife's departure from the bed. She noticed that his eyes opened and said, "Get out of bed, dear. We have much to do today. I can't take too many days off if you're not going to be running the place for a while." Michael nodded and stood up. He followed her into the kitchen, where they shared a quick breakfast. Michael went to help Amy clean up the breakfast, but she declined his help. Instead, she told him to unpack his feminine belongings from the trunk into the guest room. "What?" Michael asked out of confusion. "Go unpack your girl clothes in the guest room." "Why?" Amy huffed before she was able to find the word. "Michael, I love you. I love sharing my bed with you, but I don't want to share it with Mika." "Oh." Amy nodded slowly and looked away from Michael for a moment. Michael understood her point. He left the kitchen and grabbed his trunk. He dragged it into the guest room and unpacked its contents into the guest dresser and the guest room closet. Michael smiled as he reached the clothes at the bottom of the trunk. He rarely ever wore them because he rarely reached the bottom of the trunk. As Michael stared into the closet after he finished unpacking the trunk, he saw for the first time all of his female tops, skirts and dresses and pants at once. Michael left the bedroom and met his wife in the living room. Amy rose and walked towards him. She stroked his face and said, "You're lucky you don't show stubble. That'd save us some time here." "What do you mean?" "Come with me," Amy said with a coy smile as she led him towards the bathroom. Michael followed her into it. Michael watched as she grabbed a small pink bottle of hair removal gel. Michael's manhood became suddenly erect at the thought of finally being hairless from below the neck. His excitement turned into humiliation as Amy demanded him to strip naked. He tried to stall, not wanting her to know of the sexual desire that was stirred in him by the hair removal. Amy grew tired of his stalling and undid his pants and drew them down his legs. Michael removed his t-shirt and all that remained were his boxers. Amy looked up at him with a smile and said, "Nice tent." Michael's face turned beet red from embarrassment. Amy noticed it and said, "I think we'll start under the tent." She pulled down his boxers and clasped the base of his stiffened manhood. Amy decided to prod him further, saying, "I would say you were happy to see me, but we both know better." Amy's correct appraisal of Michael's sexual desire at the moment made him even more deeply embarrassed. His wife knew that the more feminine he got, the more aroused it made him. He wondered, how would she ever be able to think of me as a man again? Amy sprayed some of the gel onto her palm and started to smooth it over Michael's privates. She then did the same down his leg as she waited a few minutes to wipe away the hair. With every speck of hair beneath his waist covered in the creamy residue of the gel, Amy started to wipe away his hair from his privates. Michael could not even look as she did it. As he felt her move onto his legs, he looked down at his hairless manhood. He tried not to smile in delight because he feared that he would lose even more esteem in his wife's eyes than he had already. When Amy finished clearing off his leg hair, she applied the gel to his chest and armpits. Michael watched her wash her hands after she had finished applying the gel to the last bits of hair beneath his head. A few minutes later, she wiped it away too. She washed her hands again and told Michael to shower. Michael stepped in the shower as she left the bathroom. He ran his hands down his smooth legs and chest. It felt right to him. His manhood stiffened from the sensations and the thoughts of his decidedly girlish physique. Only his manhood and lack of breasts made the body he looked down at appear unfeminine. Michael washed his shoulder-length hair last. He got out of the shower and put a towel over his hair. He had never done it before. He had wanted to, but he always reminded himself not to. He wrapped a towel around his body starting at his chest and not his waist. It was an absent-minded decision, he realized as he stepped out of the bathroom. He dropped the towel from his head and moved his body towel to his waist. He started to head towards the master bedroom, but Amy appeared in the hallway and corrected him. He went into the guest room, and Amy followed him in. Amy kissed him on the lips and looked him in the eyes as she finished. She smiled and said, "I'll see you soon." "Where are you going?" "Me. I'm not going anywhere. You're going away for a while, and Mika is coming to stay here." "Oh, right. Yes. I'll be waiting for her in the living room. Tell her to meet me there when you see her on the way out." Michael nodded and watched her draw the door closed behind her as she left the room. Michael was left alone to craft Mika's look. He walked towards the dresser and looked through his collection of panties and hosiery. He selected a pair of gray opaque tights. He had never worn them since he purchased them, and he had wanted to for some time. After putting them on, he put on his bra and B-cup breast forms. He then headed towards the closet. He selected a black, knee-length, pencil skirt. He then placed on a light blue, 3/4 sleeved V-neck. Michael then looked at his shoe collection. Michael muttered to himself as he glanced at the closet floor, "Now, let's see about shoes. I really don't have anything to sensible for all day wear except for the flats, but I really don't need shoes around the house." Michael pranced over to his dresser. He took his makeup bag out of one of the top drawers of the dresser. He applied mascara and black eyeliner before he took hold of a container of pink lip gloss. He delicately applied it and looked in the mirror. Framed by his long golden locks, his face gave the appearance of a plain woman with a good amount of makeup on. He wondered if he was as passable as he thought. He by no means believed he was especially attractive, but he did not think that others would conclude he was a man based on his appearance. He wondered what his wife would think when she saw. She had seen him in drag before, but now she knew he was hairless beneath his clothes. Maybe that would be the final straw for her. Michael hesitated before he opened the door. He peered out the doorway and did not see Amy. He walked towards the living room and Amy heard him coming. She moved her head so she could see him coming. She smiled as he walked in. "How are you, Mika?" "I'm good," Michael said lowly. "Well, it's good to see you. Now, there's a list of chores for you to do in the kitchen." "Oh," Michael said as he realized she was putting him to work immediately. "Get started on them and join me for lunch around 1. We'll talk then." "Oh, I won't be home for dinner. I just wanted to tell you. I almost forgot. Where are you going to be?" "Work. I'm working my husband's shift tonight, then I'm swapping it with the usual morning boss, Krista." Michael nodded and turned and walked towards the kitchen. He found the list on the counter. He read the list over to himself: clean the tub, toilet, bathroom sink, scrub bathroom floor, vacuum bedrooms and living room, mop kitchen and dining, dust all the furniture. Michael realized that she had a full day of chores planned for him. He knew he would be sore when he was through, but it would certainly keep his mind of work. Michael set to work in the bathroom first. Michael scoured the bathroom floor with a blue and white handheld brush. When he finished, he turned his attention to cleaning and polishing the porcelain tub. After that, he did the toilet next. As he ran the toilet brush over the marks in the toilet bowl, Amy popped her head in to see how he was doing. Michael looked up at her as his left arm rested on the toilet. A feeling of intense humiliation overcame him as he thought of how he must have looked dressed as a woman and intently cleaning a lavatory. Amy smiled as she walked away from the bathroom. Michael finished cleaning the sink and then turned his attention to mopping the kitchen. Since he decided to not wear shoes, Michael was careful to leave a dry walking path for himself as he mopped the floor. He finished a few minutes before 1 and called out to Amy, "What do you want for lunch?" Amy responded she wanted tuna salad. Michael opened a can of tuna and made up the salad for her. They shared the meal together at the kitchen table. It was a quiet meal. She said they would talk, but the only words Amy said were designed to induce Michael to pass various items down the table to her. After Amy finished eating, she excused herself and went back to the living room. Michael felt ignored by her. He wondered what she was thinking. He cleaned her plate and his and the rest of what was needed to serve and make lunch. As he did so, he wondered why she was so quiet. She seemed indifferent towards him, so much different from when he was not dressed as a woman hours earlier. Michael hoped it was only her coping mechanism regarding his cross-dressing. Michael went back to the list and continued to do the chores she left for him even after she had left for the diner. Michael only took a break to eat dinner. He finished his final chore shortly before Amy came home. Michael was still up when she arrived. Michael went out to meet her. Amy looked at him as she put her pocketbook down. Michael asked, "How was your night?" Amy described her night. She briefly talked about paperwork before changing the subject to how her employees were taking her husband's breakdown. She tried not to dwell too much on it and said most of the night was normal. It was simply seating customers and talking with her waitresses. Michael noticed a certain warmth in Amy that had been absent from her earlier in the day. He wondered if she was trying to be nicer or was more comfortable with him being en femme. Michael was weary from a hard day's labor and told her good night. Amy walked over and hugged him and told him to have a good night's sleep. Michael walked to his bed with a smile on his face. He was certain that she had grown more comfortable with their temporary arrangements. He only hoped that it did not mean that she'd grown uncomfortable with viewing him as a man. Chapter 3. Upon awakening the next morning, Michael got to making Amy breakfast. He served and ate beside her and watched her head out the door for another day of work. After cleaning up the kitchen, Michael set about taking care of the rest of the home. He made his bed and Amy's, but found that there was not much else for him to do. He had done it all the day before. Michael meandered around the home in his long, white skirt and 2-inch-heeled, black shoes, feeling like a bored housewife. He began to understand why taking care of the home was not enough for most women. The life of a domestic partner was by no means as thrilling as he believed. There was simply not enough to do around the home. Michael walked into the den and turned on the television. He perused the daytime lineups and found that nothing was particularly interesting to him. Still, he watched the television all day because he could find nothing better to do. Shortly before he knew Amy would arrive home from work that evening, Michael started making dinner. He figured he could have it almost on the table when she walked in. He was right. When Amy reached her home that night, she came home to a set dinner table and the smell of an imminent meal. She sat at the table and waited for Michael to serve her. Michael brought the food over to the table and poured drinks for the two of them. Amy watched as her husband seemed to take special care to make sure everything was in its proper place on the table before he served her. As they got to eating, Amy told Michael about her day. She skipped the monotonous details of the Michaels and the rest of the business's books. Michael listened with rapt attention. When she finished, she asked, "How was your day?" "Okay, I suppose." "Only okay?" Amy asked for clarification. "Yes. More or less." "Well, what did you do today?" Amy asked. "I made the beds and diner. Cleaned up the kitchen after breakfast, made myself lunch. That's about it." "That didn't take you all day, did it?" "No. Obviously it didn't. I watched TV for a good part of the day." Reading into Michael's tone of voice, Amy replied sarcastically, "Sounds like you had the time of your life." Michael shrugged and admitted, "I get why women work now. There's not enough to do around the house. It's boring around here." "Well, Mika, if you're bored, I can get you a job as a waitress down at my diner." "What?" Michael said in a near shout. "Oh, yes. We could use another girl down there." "You can't be serious," Michael said, unable to believe what she was saying. "I know you don't have any experience doing it, but it's not brain surgery. All you need is decent balance and the ability to remember simple things." "But what about the other waitresses?" "Oh, Mika, don't worry about them. I've told them all about you. Everyone there knows." Michael's stomach dropped. Amy had sold him out. He was exposed to his employees. He did not know how he would ever be able to show his face there again. He shook his head a little and in a trembling voice asked meekly, "How could you?" "How could I what?" Amy answered. How could you tell them about me? Oh, Mika. Don't worry about that. They had to know given what happened on Michael's last shift. I didn't want them to worry about him. The girls weren't offended by you. It felt good to tell them. They really helped me deal with it. There, I guess the word is progressive. Now, the cooks and the busboys, while they found it a little funny. I won't lie about that. They're guys, after all. And you know how men are, just a bunch of dicks. Michael felt a fluttering in his stomach as he comprehended what Amy told him. He knew that he had lost the respect of his male employees. He had surrendered his masculinity in their eyes. He knew how men viewed crossdressers. They were below their contempt. They were the subject of ridicule. He was now the subject of his employees' ridicule. He knew the girls would take it better. They'd probably make some remarks about him, but they would not belabor the issue. They could move past it. Even if they would not accept a crossdresser as their boyfriend or husband, they could tolerate being around one if not accept it. That was why Michael always preferred the company of women. Growing tired of Michael's silence regarding her offer, Amy asked, So, Mika, what's your answer? Michael shook his head and said, No. No. I can't. I'm sorry. Thank you. Michael read the look of disappointment on Amy's face. He put his head down, upset with himself for disappointing her given what she was doing for him. Amy took a deep breath and asked, Why don't you want to do it? Michael squirmed and decided to tell the truth. It's not that I don't want to work for you. It's that I don't think I could pass. I don't want all the stares and stuff. You don't have to worry about that, Mika. Well, thank you though. There's something else. What is it? Amy inquired as she took a bite of the steak. I know it's silly, especially since the crew knows. I just don't want them to see me when they see Michael, Michael replied, trying to go along with the distinction between his female and male persona that his wife was trying to adhere to. I can understand that, Mika. I really can. I don't think it's founded though. I think they would actually be surprised at how good you look. They don't believe me when I tell them about it. I think they think that you look like a man with overdone, clownish makeup. Michael squirmed before he said, I just don't know how the place could run right if I was working beside them. Don't worry about that. You know I run a tight ship. I don't tolerate interferences with serving our customers. You know that damn well. I know, Amy, Michael started to say before Amy interjected by saying, Then you have no reason to not go to work there. You're the one that gets bored. I'm giving you a way to be a more productive member of this household. Don't act like others are dictating your choice in the matter. The choice is yours. Michael nodded at what she said. She was right. He relented. You're right, Amy. I'm sorry I shot down the idea earlier. I would love to get out of here a few days this week. Fantastic. You start training tomorrow during the morning and early afternoon shift. There's less customers then, so it'll be a perfect time for you to start. Who knows, maybe you'll be able to work the evening shift when Diane's in charge. Michael was less than intrigued at the possibility of working beneath his employee, but he put up a false front and nodded with a smile to Amy's statement. Amy looked at Michael as he went back to eating and asked, What's your shoe size again? Chapter 4 After both had finished eating, shaving, and showering the next morning, Michael and Amy got ready for their first day at work as employee and employer. Michael was eager to get his employee-turned-co-workers' first views of him en femme out of the way. He wondered how they would respond when they saw him. Would they recoil or burst into laughter? He was anxious to see their responses. As he looked through his wardrobe for what he would wear to work that day, his stomach knotted. He looked down at his bra and breast form and his matching black panties. What will the guys say about this? He wondered. He was sure that if they could see him standing in a bedroom in a bra and panties and looking into a closet filled with women's clothing, they would break out in laughter, unable to hold in their disdain. Michael decided that he would keep his clothing choice to wear to and from the diner as conservative as possible. Michael removed his only pair of a woman's pants from the closet. A pair of black capris that hung off his body somewhat loosely since he bought them online because of his fear of being judged if he tried them on in a store. He stepped into the pants and zipped the front fly. He then looked for his least flamboyant top. A grimace came across his face as he looked into his closet. He knew that was no plain tops in his closet. His wardrobe was that of a closeted cross-dresser after all. Every top seemed to him to have a look-at-me look to it. Most of his tops were silk, satin, or were either ruffled or enjoyed detailed, feminine embroidery. With a sense of regret of not having purchased anything less flashy, Michael removed a silk, black blouse from the closet. He placed it over his head and made sure his breasts were straight. Michael turned away from the closet and approached his dressing table. He applied his lipstick in the mirror before he turned to applying his mascara. He finished his look by applying black eyeliner to contrast with his blue eyes. Michael pulled his hair back and put a hair clip on to keep his hair above his shoulders. Michael looked in the mirror and saw a woman approaching middle age staring back at him. He was confident in how he looked, but he was also frightened that he had too good of an opinion of his looks. He wondered if others would see right through him. Maybe his perception was off. Maybe Amy was lying about him being passable. The thoughts kept running through his head as he walked back towards his closet to select a pair of shoes. He looked at the 7 pairs of shoes he had collected over the years. His desire to not be flashy resulted in him immediately putting aside everything with a high heel, which left him with only 2 choices: a pair of shiny, gold ballet flats or a 1-inch heel pair of beige sandals. Believing they were the less campy choice, Michael selected the sandals and placed them on. Michael walked over to his bed and picked up the plain black purse that Amy had made up for him the night before. She told him it included everything he would need to fix up his makeup and his appearance while he was at work. He had thanked her for doing it, but it was just going to be another thing for his new coworkers to lord over him. What would they think of their boss working amongst them dressed as a woman and carrying a purse? He wondered. He knew what he would think if he were one of them. Still, Michael put up a brave front and waited for Amy to be ready. She emerged from her bedroom dressed as she normally did for work. She was wearing beige capris, a plain white blouse and flat, black sandals. She looked him over as she stood before him. She smiled as she said, "Those shoes and top make you look even girlier than me." Michael blushed at her statement, which made the smile on her face grow even wider. Amy motioned for him to come along and Michael followed her to her car. Amy drove them to the diner, a clear break from the usual when they went in together. Michael always drove them, but Mika was just a passenger. Michael's mind raced as they drove towards the diner. His mind frequently dwelled on what his now coworkers would say both with their mouths and their eyes about him. They knew he was coming in. It was not going to be a surprise. Amy had personally called every person scheduled to work that day and told them that Mika was coming to work there as a waitress. Michael squirmed when he thought about that too. Every person from all 3 of the diner's 8-hour shifts was notified. That was practically every employee he had been in charge of 3 days before. They all knew that he was to now be treated not as their boss and not as a man. He was to be regarded by the others as just another waitress at the diner. They parked behind the diner, where they always parked. They walked towards the building. Michael walked in slow, hesitant steps while Amy strolled towards it with her normal confidence. Realizing that he was not beside her, Amy turned and hollered, "Move your ass, girl." Michael blushed and hurried towards Amy. Amy led Michael inside and there they saw the all-night waitresses and hostess boss that were soon to be relieved. The hostess and some of the waitresses turned and looked at Michael and Amy the minute they walked through the door. Michael read each of their faces and it was not contempt. It was a look of wonder that was on their faces. At that moment, Michael was sure that his view of his appearance was accurate and Amy was not trying to humor him about it. However, it was not the waitress's opinions that concerned him. It was the men in the kitchen and the busboys. Those were the people he really feared would give him a hard time about it. Even though he was going to be their boss once more, Michael was afraid that they would make slips that would reveal how they felt about him now. Michael followed Amy towards the kitchen doors. He paused before them. Noticing this, Amy yanked him through the doors. The kitchen workers and the two busboys getting ready to end their shifts turned and looked at him. One busboy cracked a smile, but the others bit their lips. Michael was relieved that they had kept their opinions to themselves for the moment. Michael followed Amy into the large storage closet where they kept the uniforms and shoes. Amy moved towards the door and told Michael to get dressed. Amy closed the door behind her as she exited, and Michael, when he heard the kitchen doors swing open, he knew that Amy was going to be out of the staff's earshot. As he stood there dressed only in his bra and panties, he heard the staff start to chuckle. He was sure that it was directed at him. His face turned red from embarrassment as he stepped into the waitress uniform that set his establishment apart from others. The uniform was his idea when the place opened. He explained to his wife that the idea behind it was to give the establishment a retro appeal. In reality, it was to be surrounded with waitresses dressed the way he would like to. However, now that he was going to be, he largely regretted the choice. Michael stepped into the pink, knee-length, cotton dress. The dress had black stripes at the bottom of its short sleeves, a black collar, and had black stitching. It had 3 black buttons on the front of it, and Michael fastened the buttons. He straightened out the dress and took hold of a black apron. He tied its straps around his waist before he walked towards where the shoes were kept. He took a hold of the black sneakers. He placed them on and put his clothes and shoes and bag in the corner where the waitresses left their belongings when they were working. He then grabbed one of the pink and black hats his waitresses used to finish off their appearances. Michael took a look at himself in the mirror. He was relieved by what he saw. He looked just like the other waitresses. He was sure no customer would notice he was not a woman. He took a deep breath and opened the door. He turned towards the kitchen and saw that the morning crew had replaced the night one. They turned and faced him. One started to laugh, but another cook hit him in an attempt to have him keep it together. Michael rushed out of there as quickly as possible. The kitchen workers could only fight back their amusement as their boss hurried by dressed as a waitress with an embarrassed smile on his face. As he left the kitchen, he heard more laughs among the men. Michael looked around and saw Karen motioning him towards her. Karen was one of 3 waitresses working that morning besides him. She was in her early 30s and had worked at the diner for a little over 10 years. Karen smiled and said, "Hello, Mika. It's a pleasure to meet you." Michael smiled and replied that it was nice to see her. Karen then said, "Well, I'd just like to tell you that you look pretty cute. All things considered." "Thanks," Michael said as he blushed. He was beginning to realize that if he looked cute as a girl, he almost certainly did not look manly usually. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his wife had never even described him in manly terms. She always seemed to cast him in girlish terms like soft. He was sure that this was all supposed to bother him, but it seemed almost a relief that he did have a masculine appearance about him even when he was a man. Michael then excused himself and turned away from Karen. He looked around and saw the 2 other waitresses staring at him as he made his way towards his wife. They too gave him astonished looks. The looks seemed to be disbelieving. He was sure that the frumpy, middle-aged one was giving him a look of envy. Indeed, Kara walked over to him and told him as much as she walked past him to get to another table she waited on. An elderly couple walked into the diner as Michael was picking up a pad and a pen. Amy turned to him and said, "This couple's yours. Seat them at a table in the left room." Michael nodded and picked up 2 menus from the menu stand. He then approached the couple and said, "Good morning. I'm Mika. I'll be your waitress. Will you please follow me?" The elderly couple followed him to the table. The couple both had thick glasses on and did not seem to pick up on Michael being other than a woman. Michael asked if they wanted anything to drink before they ordered their meals. He took down the order for a coffee and a tea and left them to decide what they wanted for breakfast. Michael walked behind the diner counter and made up tea and poured a cup of coffee. He carried it back to the table. By the time he reached it, they were ready to order. Michael took down their order and gave it to the kitchen. He paused as he turned away from the kitchen. It was at that moment that Michael realized that he was doing it. He was really just another waitress in his own diner. He found the thought arousing for reasons he could not understand. His thought process was soon broken when Amy said something to him that he failed to listen to properly. He asked what she said and she replied, "I asked you to bring me a coffee. You've got to pay more attention, girl." Girl! She called me girl again, Michael thought as he went back behind the counter to pour another cup of coffee. He carried the cup over to Amy and said, "Here you go, Amy. That's Mrs. Anastasia." Amy responded calmly, yet sternly. Michael's face lost all expression before he responded, "Of course. I'm sorry, Mrs. Anastasia." Michael walked over to the elderly couple as he contemplated what had just transpired. He was not getting any special treatment from his wife. He had to treat her the same way the other waitresses treated her, and she would treat him like the other waitresses. Michael asked the couple if they need more coffee or tea, but they politely declined. He then walked back towards the cash register where he saw Amy standing next to Eva, who was the youngest waitress working that day. Eva was everything he wished to be. She was in her 20s and tanned with dark raven hair. The way her tanned legs looked poking out from beneath her waitress dress was what he had envisioned when he chose the uniform. She was the perfect girl for the uniform. He had envisioned it on someone like her when he started the business 15 years earlier. When she interviewed for the job a little over a year ago, Michael was instantly smitten with her. It was a lust that at times consumed his desires. It also troubled him greatly. Other women he viewed as beautiful in the past had caused him some distress because he both wanted to be with them and them. He knew that if he made his feelings known, he would be an outcast. However, his feelings for Eva were never conflicted. He only wanted to be her. To Michael, she was the perfection of a waitress. Amy was not happy about how he looked Eva after she was hired, but she eventually moved past it. She was not sure how he viewed her. She often wondered if he wanted to be a woman. His comments about Eva had largely convinced her that he indeed did. In his unguarded moments, Michael admitted to admiring her, but he never put it in sexual terms. Amy was sure that he revered Eva as some unreachable ideal for himself, not for her. Amy was correct in her views. Michael had no sexual feelings for Eva. Michael had a hard time admitting that to himself though. He was not attracted to his view of female perfection. As it was, Michael was finding himself less attracted to women period. Though he was not becoming attracted to men, he still found them repulsive creatures that he was unfortunate enough to be among. Instead, Michael felt that he was becoming increasingly asexual as he aged. His wandering eye for women had been replaced by only desire to be one. The only woman that did anything for him sexually any longer was his wife. Amy's dislike of Eva also faded when she realized that Eva only dated men who looked like they professionally lifted weights. Eva's boyfriends often looked as if they weighed more than 3 times what Michael did. Amy knew that even if she was wrong about her husband, Eva would not go for him and her husband would not attempt to seduce her. Amy realized that when she and Michael met Eva's last boyfriend, Terrence. Amy had read the look of inferiority on Michael's face when they had met him. Amy knew how Michael appraised himself as he glanced at Terrence. Michael did view him as Amy thought. In Michael's mind, Terrence was 6 feet 2 inches, muscle-bound and a hulk of a man, as Eva called him. Michael was sure Terrence was all that and that he was just a 5 feet 8 inches, anorexic-looking boy-girl. Michael had spent his adolescence desperately trying to gain weight. He had tried to bulk up and look like the male classmates, but it was not to be for him. Michael looked at Eva and then down at the ground as he stood next to his wife. Amy read Michael's shame at appearing before his conception of female perfection dressed as a fellow waitress. Indeed, Michael was ashamed. He felt like a pathetic worm next to her. Now that his outward appearance resembled how he felt inside, he knew that it was even clearer how inferior he was compared to her male lovers. Eva stood next to him, smiled and sizing him up for a bit before Amy asked her, "So, Eva, what do you think of Mika's appearance?" Michael managed to raise his eyes to look at Eva as she responded, I mean she looks good for what she is." Michael blushed as he contemplated her words regarding him. "What she is, that just means she thinks I'm some perv fag." Amy responded, "Mika, thank Eva for her compliment." Michael, unable to look at her, said to Eva, "Thank you." To Michael's relief, he heard the couple's order was ready. He went and picked up the plates and carried them to the table. He then came back and refilled the old man's cup of coffee. Shortly thereafter, business picked up at the diner. The morning rush was on. However, it was the weekday, so Michael was not overwhelmed with working the tables in his area. Michael took orders and served the various patrons coming in. Not one of them paid enough attention to him to realize that he was not how he seemed at first glance. To the customers, he was just an average-looking waitress. Not the type that merits a second look. He made his rounds, refilling coffee cups as he waited on taking and delivering orders. As Michael collected his first tip, the reality of the situation came back to him. He was not pretending to be a waitress. He was a waitress. When he could find a moment to spare, Michael conversed with Amy and his fellow waitresses. He found himself at ease with them as they talked about fashion and television. Michael learned more about Karen that day than he had in the entire time she had worked there. She had one more child than he knew about. He had always known her to be a respectful woman, but she was also kind and caring. Michael realized why Amy talked to her the most. Michael's conversations with Caro were briefer. Her sympathetic views of him were balanced against her contempt for his cross-dressing and jealousy over his appearance. Her words for him were more curt and her sentences shorter. She tried to do it respectfully, considering that he was still an owner even if he was not considered to be that person at the moment by his wife. Michael understood her reaction to him, and he did not let it bother him. The words he shared with Eva produced a more varied reaction in him. Eva possessed neither contempt nor care towards Michael. She was in her own world, and the affairs of Michael's life did not bother her at all. She was the least beholden to her job. Eva knew as well as Michael that a beautiful woman can always get a job. It was this knowledge that always allowed Eva to speak more freely than the other waitresses who worked for him. Eva thinly disguised her contempt for the kitchen crew that made fun of Michael. Referring to them as needle-dicked homophobes in an area of the diner open to the public, Eva made Michael blush. He was afraid patrons would complain, but they did not even hear Eva. Another moment they met up, Eva began to tell Michael about her new boyfriend. She described him as a modern-day Adonis and a real man's man. Her description of her boyfriend only stood to make Michael feel weak, inadequate and aroused. Shortly before 11, the diner's business encountered its normal slowdown before the lunch rush. Michael took the opportunity to get a bite to eat as he stood behind the diner counter and the other waitresses worked their tables and booths. As Michael finished, he noticed that Amy was seemingly getting ready to leave. Amy walked over to the diner counter where Karen was now standing beside Michael. She looked at Karen and said, "Karen, I have got to do some errands. I need you to be in charge up front while I'm out." "Of course, Mrs. Anastas." Michael looked at Amy with a look of astonishment. He was being passed over to run the place. He had run the diner for years. It eventually clicked in his head that his wife was doing what she said she would do. She was compartmentalizing him. Michael had run the place for years, but Mika was just a new waitress. Karen was far more experienced in the diner than Mika. Amy noticed Michael's look of resignation and said with a smile, "When I'm gone, Mika, Karen is in charge. That's the way it is when I leave and the other people that run this place aren't here." Is that understood? Michael nodded and said, Of course, Mrs. Anastas. Way to echo, the senior girl, Mika, Amy said before she turned away from them with her purse hanging off her shoulder. As she left the building, Michael looked at Karen and asked, Did she say when she's coming back? No, but just about every time she works she goes out about now. She comes back a little after 12 when the lunch rush starts to pick up. Oh, was all Michael could reply. Two men walked into the diner, and Karen ordered Michael to seat them in his area. He complied with his former employee's direction. The fact that he was following her orders aroused him. He could not help but feel delighted to being ordered about by his former subordinate. After Michael took their orders and brought them their drinks, he wandered back to the diner counter. He noticed Eva talking to a strapping young man. Then he noticed her waving him over. Michael shook his head and tried to walk away. However, Eva would have none of it. She grabbed Michael by the arm and dragged him over towards the guy. Ted, this is the new waitress here, Mika. Mika, this is my new boyfriend, Ted, Eva said. Pleasure, Ted said. Nice to meet you, Michael managed to reply. Michael stared at Ted. He was like all of Eva's boyfriends he had met. He was young and muscular. He had the look of a strong, alpha male. He was everything Michael was not. Michael felt inadequate next to her boyfriends before, but now that he was standing before one dressed in an old-fashioned waitress's uniform it was even more pronounced. Ted peered down at Michael's legs and said, You've got really nice, shapely legs. I don't think I've seen a woman your age with legs that nice. Eva shook her head at Ted and mouthed, Don't mention a woman's age. However, Michael had overlooked the age part. He blushed and thanked Ted and turned away from him. Michael knew at that moment what he had let happen. There was no denying it. He was not a man any longer. He was not even sure if he had ever been one. He was a male biologically, but he had the frame of a woman. He had felt his gender was a mistake of nature before, but he tried to deny it. There was no longer any such reason. The pretense was gone. He was wearing a dress and standing before another man who had no idea that the waitress in front of him was male. No male could do that or even allow themselves to be put in that situation. Michael managed to get away from them when Karen called him to the front of the store to wait on a group of people that walked in. As Michael waited on them, he saw that Amy had re-entered the diner. She was back at the register. She watched him whenever she could. When his shift ended and the next crew came in, Michael was too preoccupied to notice how they first assessed him. His appearance was new to them, but he had forgotten that anyone could still be shocked. Given Amy's presence, the incoming waitresses bit their tongues, as did the incoming kitchen staff as Amy and Michael exited the building through the rear exit. Chapter 5. The car ride home was largely quiet. Amy tried to engage Michael in conversation, but his mind seemed to be elsewhere. Michael's mind pondered how he could tell her what he had discovered about himself. He was sure she could only take it poorly. It could end their relationship. He wondered if he should even tell her or just carry the burden in his mind. Shortly after they entered their home, Amy turned to Michael and asked, Mika, could you make dinner? Of course, Amy. I can call you Amy here, can't I? Michael inquired with a smile. Amy grinned back at him and replied, Yes, that's fine anywhere but at work. You know how it is. I can't make exceptions, to be fair to the others. Michael nodded and got to work preparing dinner. When he finished putting it on the table, Amy joined him for dinner. Halfway through their meal, Michael finally got the courage to speak. Amy, can we talk a minute? Of course. I really liked working there today. Well, that's good. You're scheduled to be in tomorrow. I hope it's good for you again. Well, I don't want it to end. Don't want to end. My waitressing. Waitressing? You want to be a waitress for? Yes, somewhat forever. I can't. I know. I love Michael. I need him around. I understand. He'll be back at the end of the week, Michael said as he put his head down in defeat. Amy read the solemn look on his face. She tried to find a compromise in her mind. Upon finding something she found sufficient, Amy said, "Perhaps you can keep being a waitress at the diner." "Really?" Michael said, unable to conceal his excitement. "Well, hear me out first. You can keep doing it, and you can come by every once in a while like you did before. But I want Michael to clean my home. He'll be kind of a house husband." Michael, understanding the compromise his wife was making for him, seized on it. "Thank you, Amy. That would be wonderful. I'm sure Michael will be more than happy to be your house husband." "So am I, but there's something else." "What?" "I'm going to need help running the diner, if he's a stay-at-home husband." "I see." "Well, don't get me wrong about this, but I think I'm going to promote Karen to that role." Michael's eyes darted from side to side as he comprehended being passed over for a supervisor role in a diner he had largely run for years. Not only was he being passed over, but he was being passed over for his former employees. Amy noticed Michael's expression and elaborated, "It's not that you're not up to the job. I think you could do it. It's just that Karen and one other girl are really next in line for the job. You'd be probably third on the list of my employees that I would consider for the position, but that's only because you have the least time." "I understand. You have to be fair." "Yes. I just can't promote you before them. It wouldn't be fair. They've put the time in, and you've only done a day there." Michael noticed that Amy was still drawing distinctions between Michael and Mika. Michael smiled and said, "I don't want to put you in a bad situation with Karen. She's a doll. I wish Karen the best of luck. I really like her. I'm sure she'll be a great boss. I'm sure you'll be raving about her. She'll probably be the best boss you've ever had."